Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, one and all. Thanks for joining us in this edition of the SRE Practitioner Series. We are in number episode 11. Today we have a guest, Mr. Harpeet Singh, co-founder and CTO of Watermelon. Now, Harpreet Singh has over 2 decades of experience in banking, financial services, and site reliability engineering. And he has done a lot of pioneering work on building teams and capabilities around site reliability engineering. So, who else would be better suited to action to the community of their learning experiences and journey in the site reliability engineering? So, please welcome Harpreet Singh to join us all the way from Singapore to share his wisdom on the site reliability journey with all of our viewers. Thanks, Harpreet, for taking time amidst your busy schedule and being with us today. I hope you're doing well and staying safe.
Firstly, good day, Suresh, and thank you for having me on this excellent talk series. I've been an avid follower, so thank you for hosting me, and good day to all the viewers wherever you are in the world.
Excellent. So, Harpreet, for our viewers, give us a rundown on how did you land up on what you are today? Because what's been your journey, what's been your experience, and what really prompted you to be passionate about SRE? I know for some time now that you have been a very passionate on site reliability engineering. So, give us a rundown of your memory lane of where you started off and where did you land up?
Yeah, it's been a very interesting journey, very fulfilling journey, I must say. Also been very lucky, I must say, to have had the right opportunities at the right times. I started off as a system admin, specializing in Solaris and AIX administration back in the late 90s. So I was kind of fortunate enough to see the Y2K challenges. Fortunately, we got through that. I continued being a system admin and spent a good 10 years doing that. And then eventually started to look at something beyond system administration. So I kind of landed into a role called service improvement, which is very interesting, where I was looking at infrastructure hotspots, application hotspots, looking at areas to improve and so on. So that was another real fulfilling tenure, if I may say, because a lot of those learnings back then resonate very well with what we do in SRE today. I mean, SRE was never formalized as a practice back then, right? But we did a lot of things which we could relate today under the SRE umbrella. And then I was kind of fortunate enough to look at supporting enterprise tools like batch management systems, content management systems, and so on. I led teams on enterprise monitoring, which kind of links very well with the observability pillar in SRE.
Right.
And I think one of the biggest and the best opportunities I got was to do infrastructure automation, right? Given the rate at which technology was evolving and people, pushing hard for, virtualization and then eventually containerization and so on. Fortunately, I had a great opportunity to work on infrastructure automation, and that wasn't necessarily restricted to provisioning and things, but we did a lot around infrastructure security, automating deployments, automating patch management, and a lot of things in the infrastructure space, including batch automation and things like that. So that was interesting, and the natural evolution from there was to start to move more towards the application world, right? So that's when I had the opportunity to go and look at DevOps, setting up pipelines. Being part of a group that looked at DevOps at an enterprise level. And then the next evolution of doing infrastructure plus DevOps was to look at SRE. So again, as I said, I've been kind of lucky because I got the right opportunities at the right times. And then for the last close to 3.5 to 4 years, I've been living and breathing SRE, obviously being associated with one of the best banks in the world in my previous roles. Actually, that helped me massively, right? So where we had the right opportunities to experiment, to think through how SRE could be done at an enterprise level, and not really, in core tech companies, right? Looking at doing it in the financial services sector was a pretty interesting challenge. But yeah, and that led to a lot of learning. The need to create a lot of enablement for people to embark that SRE journey and so on, right? And we started looking at SRE not necessarily as a people function, but as a practice. And that's eventually what led to to thinking about watermelon and how we could take some of those learnings, those practices, that enablement to the world. So again, I'm delighted to be here, and thanks for that, because I haven't spoken about this journey in a long time. So
Excellent. So to start with, how do you ensure reliability? Because this is one of the most abused words after digital transformation, in my opinion. So how do you try to look at reliability as a philosophy, as a concept, but also as a practice? So how do you ensure reliability? Is that something which is doable, considering this whole end-to-end value chain being so complex, distributed environment?
absolutely right. I think, see, reliability is the need of the hour, right? So reliability and security, right? Of course, since we're talking about reliability, so we'll stick with that today. So if you look at reliability in itself, so if you take one step back, just look at what's happening out in the world. Business evolution is rapid, obviously fueled by technology evolution. If you look at where we stand today with modern stack, even if you go back 5-6 years, right, when things were still fairly nascent and evolving, the growth has been tremendous in terms of the technology landscape.
Right.
And the good news is there has been widespread adoption, right?
Right.
I mean, let alone the FANG companies of the world, but even financial sector, insurance sector, and people are embracing it really, really well.
Right.
So business requirements, business evolution with tech, fueled by tech evolution, and the third thing is customer demands. The customers, see, we've got everything on our fingertips today. I mean, myself being a customer, from a banking customer perspective, I've got every single thing on my fingertips today, and the tolerance for failure is actually very, very low. Right. If a service back in the day was unavailable for 30 minutes, it's fine. We'll go have a coffee, come back and try. But now there's a sense of urgency in doing things, and I think maybe as a human species we've grown a bit impatient with all the luxuries that we have right. around us. So the tolerance for failure is actually very, very low.
Right.
And from a business perspective, how do you continue to meet those expectations from customer and better that every single day, right? And that cannot come at the cost of reliability, right? So reliability becomes absolutely vital. Given how we are evolving in across various different facets of business technology as well as customer expectations. So going back to your question, how do we ensure reliability? Right now, SRE, as you know, to each its own. People might view it differently, given their organizational construct, given the level of maturity they are operating at, given the technology stacks and so on. But how do you ensure reliability? To me, it's all about common sense, right? And they say common sense is not so common for a reason.
Correct.
But it's just that people are so hung up doing their day-to-day delivery that the focus on reliability doesn't take precedence over things. And that's where I always say, right, reliability should not be an afterthought. Rather, it should be the primary thought and integral to every aspect of system delivery. I think that's crucial. Now, how do we ensure? So let's dig a bit deeper into that. So imagine, as a product owner or a business owner, we've got an idea that we want to take to the market. Your reliability actually needs to start at that point when you've conceived that idea in your head.
Correct.
Right? So you've got to shift extremely left. It's not necessarily that, I do error budgets, I do auto remediation, I do AI ops, I'm reliable. Your reliability actually starts way on the left. When Absolutely. I've got an idea and I'm thinking that I've got to take this idea to the market in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever the time frame is, how do we actually translate that idea into a business requirement? How does that business requirement pan out to be a technical requirement? What is the architecture that supports that? What's the code that fuels that architecture to drive the business requirement forward? How do you test? How do you do a product launch? How do you release that? And so on, right? And how do you take it forward? So your thinking needs to start from the left. So from an SRE perspective, you've actually got to start thinking that here is a product idea that needs to go out. Here is an architecture that needs to be delivered or deployed. Now, you've got to start thinking of what are the failure points that need to go with that architecture. Sure. You've also got to set certain expectations, saying that from a business point of view, every transaction that happens here should not exceed 3 seconds, for example. If that's a goal that you're working with, how does that architecture deliver to that business ask? Correct. You don't draw something on paper and throw it across the fence for somebody to go and implement and deliver, right?
Correct.
But how do you actually scale for that? How do you build or how would you design your architecture to deliver that, right? So if you start putting that SRE lens across every single aspect of system delivery, you will actually, more often than wrong, you will actually deliver a reliable product, right? Now we could talk about different areas. So you could talk about architecture. I mean, we can probably dive into that deeper. You can look at code quality. So obviously, I would believe most organizations have proper code quality standards. They would be running their SAST, they'd be running their DAST, maybe even IAST going forward. How do they actually bring all of that? And how do they ensure that that consistent quality is delivered through and through, right? Whether they do it through gates or through manual processes, but there has to be a clear focus on that. Now, the other key area is testing, right? If you look at testing in particular, it's to me it's one of the most overlooked areas, if in my opinion. And there are various reasons to that, right? So I think we can cover that subsequently. But again, testing plays a crucial role in ensuring reliability. Now, you might look at testing from a functional perspective, non-functional perspective, and obviously, thanks to Netflix and the likes of Casey and some of the champions in the industry who formalized chaos engineering as a practice, and the world is actually benefiting from that, right? Now, how do you actually bring in chaos testing left? Right. A lot of people say, yeah, you've got to do chaos testing on the right because that's where the true customer experience can be measured. Now, you could do that for experimental transactions or experimental features, but you can't really do that in the financial services industry, for example. Correct. You do not want to push out an experimental feature for an ATM transaction or for an ATM capability and have queues of hundreds of people standing there just because you're doing chaos testing. It doesn't necessarily work in the real world, correct, right? Correct. How do you actually shift left from a chaos testing perspective and try to break system and try to use chaos testing to do architecture validation, for example? How do you preempt what your customer experience could actually be, right? So you could actually shift left, drive a lot of the capability. And I would say, I'm still not saying that doing it in production doesn't carry value. It definitely does. And for people who can do it, great, right? You can do that. But at least you can cover about 70 to 80% of your gaps preemptively. Right. By shifting left. And I'm telling that through experience because, you could find tons and tons of issues around, if you lose connectivity to an interfacing system, how are you going to be impacted, right? So we created something we defined something called as critical path analysis. You could have a higher category system talking to a lower category system, and you're only as strong as your weakest link. So how do you actually validate that? So if you can be smart and, think about chaos testing in a certain way, you can actually bring those practices to the left and improve, right? The other thing is observability. Now, a lot of people talk about test-driven development, behavior-driven development. There are not a lot of people talking about observability-driven development. So how do you actually shift left with your observability? How do you actually bring that observability into your development, right? And if you can bring that, you can, again, get a lot more insights during your performance tests, chaos tests, through deeper observability. And that can also give you a sense of how your services are going to perform in production. Right? So that again becomes a very crucial thing. Then, of course, there are other elements of product launch. How do you do, what are your release strategies? Are you looking at, doing blue-green deployments? Are you looking at doing canary deployments? Are you doing, rolling reboots if you're doing, say, a patching exercise, if you're still on a VM-based infrastructure? So you, again, as an SRE, you can think about all of these, right? And you can start to churn out reliable, hopefully, a much more reliable product. Because at the end of the day, if you think it's all common sense, does my architecture need to be right? Yes. Does my architecture need to be validated? Yes. Do I need to have the right code quality? Yes. Do I need to have the right depth in testing? Yes. Do I need to have the right release strategy? Yes. So all these are common sense questions. But the beauty of SRE is it's now formalizing that, right? And now I think you can see a lot of the industry leaders talking that, reliability now needs to start left. And to be honest, I've lived through that in the last 3-4 years, because we kind of started thinking that, while we can do things on the right, observability, take nothing away from that. It's absolutely vital. But how quickly you can shift left and how you can put emphasis on certain practices, right? How you could build some emphasis on a strong testing practice. How could you do that? Or how could you bring observability left and so on? So there are lots of nice little tips and tricks you can do, but all you need to do is have that mindset to actually move, right? And then obviously, once you're on the right side, then you start to look at customer experience and so on, right? And how do you measure that and so on? So you can promise reliability by doing a lot of the common sense things, which is what we call as SRE these days.
Excellent. So I think you covered quite a good amount of areas, and I want to focus on a couple of things, very key points. Now, many of times, Harpreet, testing has been a nightmare. I mean, you can bring in all the level of functional testing, non-functional testing, stress testing, regression testing, integration, but really, the confidence in testing has been always something which is eluding. So, from your own experience, how do you bring in the level of confidence on a testing from left to right? Considering there are API calls, there have been web services, there are so much things that are beyond the transaction that we are talking about. So where do you focus on? Is that going to be a prerequisite for an SRE to evolve, to first focus on the testing strategy or test automation bed?
I think SREs can really influence that, right? And you're right to say that it is challenging. And to be honest, I think organizations are practicing testing to a decent extent, but it's probably not deep enough. And the reason for that is because testing itself is a fairly complex beast, right? And for that reason, it's also probably one of the most overlooked areas as well. Now, if you put it from a reliability perspective, you can look at every single incident that happens in your organization, and you can actually pin it back on testing. So you can say that, oh yeah, I've had this issue, but yeah, why didn't we test it, right? So issues could happen due to various reasons. You could have an architectural issue, but people could say, oh, yeah, I had this system going down, but why didn't we test it, right? So you can, in a way, you can pin most of the incidents back to testing, and that's where it gets scary for a lot of people. Again, see, testing, again, you've got to start left as early as you can. Whether people practice TDD or BDD is up to them, right? But I think fundamentally, if every developer could actually do a proper unit test of the code and move forward, you're actually solving some of the problems way too early, right? But do developers have the time and bandwidth to do proper unit testing?
No.
Maybe yes, maybe no, given the the demands from the customer, the time to market that everybody is measuring these days, saying that I've got an idea and I want to be in the market 6 weeks from now. So how much time are we allocating, right? I think that's a problem. And testing, again, if you look at testing, if you're pinning on people to do quality job in terms of testing, you're only going to get to a certain distance.
Right.
Because as you said, right, there's so much evolution. And see, every application, if you look at it, it's getting more and more complex. There are API calls, and as you go more and more into the microservice world, where you were previously testing one big monolith, now you've got to test across, 10 different systems to fulfill a transaction. So that becomes really, really hard, right? So yeah, you can throw people at it, but people will only take it to a certain distance, right? So that's why you've got to have the right tooling. You've got to have the right tooling that makes testing easy for you. Now there are lots of tools out there, and they all do a certain purpose. So what would work for an organization? You've got to look at. Say, for example, if you could look at a complex system, you could have dozens of systems that it needs to connect with, right? And no transaction is fulfilled by a system on its own these days. For example, you could take a login function. A login, you could probably land somewhere. You probably connect to an IAM system. You probably connect to an OTP system somewhere, or a two-factor system somewhere, and you will respond. So just a login service itself could be 3 or 4 systems talking to each other. So how do you actually test? So from a functional perspective, yes, you can test. But then when you start to put a non-functional angle to it, I've got 10,000 requests coming in, but are all the systems in my chain that need to fulfill the request, are they all sized accurately, right? So how do you bring some of these insights into testing? So it becomes a bit complex. So that's on a little bit on the technical side, right? But if you also look at it, you've also got to get business engagement fairly early. Because in many cases, what would happen is business would rely a lot on technology to do the testing, right? And that doesn't help, because then there's always a mismatch saying that, I asked for something, you delivered something, and my customers are getting something, and you don't want to be in that situation. So how do you actually get business engaged early and keep them engaged through the testing lifecycle, right? And eventually have a proper data-driven methodology to get the sign-offs done, right? Because a lot of times it's like, I've done UAT, I've got 20 features going out, but I could test only 15 today, close my eyes on the next 5 and go in, right? And that's undesirable. But but it's fine, because then sometimes business could also take a risk saying that these, I expect low volumes, it's manageable, and so on. So engage business early, translate the requirements fairly clearly into what needs to be developed, what needs to be tested, right? Build the right automation for that. I'll tell you why automation becomes very crucial is because as you continue to roll more and more features out into production, your regression needs to keep growing as well.
Right.
And that's a massively overlooked area as well, because you roll out features, you do extensive testing on your features, which is great if you're able to do that. But then what are you breaking in production? So how much are you investing in keeping your regression packs up to date, and ensuring that your regression is done? And that's where automation really helps. Because if you're going to test something, you also don't want to compromise on not doing enough regression, right? So again, that will help you build certain confidence as well. I think that's very crucial. And again, as I said, having the right tooling, right? So if you've got a system that talks to 10 different systems to do testing, how are you going to test? Are you expecting everybody to be on the same version, or are they going to maintain different environments for you? And if they're maintaining different environments for you, then it's going to cost them dollar as well, because then they've got to scale up their infrastructure to support that. So again, use techniques like service virtualization for that. How you could virtualize service? How do you could reuse certain services across your stack, across your application landscape for people to consume, and so on. So you could use certain fit for purpose tooling that can help solve the problem, right? And hopefully Watermelon will do that in due course of time. And I think one of the other key things that really will drive confidence, one is obviously doing a lot of chaos testing if possible. Shift left, do chaos, break functionality to see how your systems respond, what your customer experience would look like. And then lastly, have the traceability. Right. Business asked for this. This was developed. This was tested. This was rolled out. Build that end-to-end traceability if you can, because if you can build the traceability, then for a fact, that I had 100 user stories to deliver. 80 have a test case associated with them. And out of these 80, there were 100 defects that were logged. This many were fixed, this many were not fixed. So at least you have a very transparent, data-driven approach. And then you can have the meaningful conversation, right? Again, one of SRE's objective is to build that bridge between business and tech. Sure. And why only from an error budget perspective? Why not from a testing perspective? Okay. So how can SREs actually play that role to shift left and have that meaningful conversation saying that, yeah, you've got these 10 features going in, but this is the depth of testing that's been done. This is the gap. Can you close? Do you want to take a risk? So those meaningful conversations through data, I think the SREs can be a real strong enabler to achieve that.
Excellent. So my final question would be on error budgets. Now, there's a lot of companies that we see around it. Is error budgets really real? Can we do something about it? How do you get some visibility on a dashboard level? Is there a kind of balance between what is broken to making that consequences or action when we talk about it? So how have you seen error budgets evolve? And how do you think is that changing that whole dimension of having a common ecosystem just focusing on the error budget part? I mean, give a little bit of dive on the error budget and how is it actually implemented in SRE world?
So error budget to me itself is a brilliant concept, right? And it's absolutely vital to measure customer experience. Now, see, different organizations can view error budgets differently. If my business, see, if your business has capability to roll experimental features, you could actually roll those out, and you can measure your experience. You can take it back and fine tune and so on, right? You can do that. Likewise for chaos testing as well. You can roll out experimental features and do that. But when it comes to real world, where organizations don't have an option to do experimental features, where they have to hit the wider segment of their customer base. Sure. How do you actually measure that customer experience? So error budget can actually be used as a tool to measure customer experience, as well as to link it back to drive improvements to that customer experience, right? Now, how do we do that? See, error budget itself is a journey, right? And especially for organizations that are aspiring to take that path, a few things are required from even before you go to an error budget implementation. Psychological safety is very key. Sure. Because what's going to happen is the minute you start measuring your customer experience in a certain way, you're actually going to see that all is not rosy, right?
Correct.
All is not green. You're definitely going to see things that are undesirable, but you've got to address them. So I think the first things first is that psychological safety for people to implement an error budget, saying that, I don't know where I stand today. I'm going to use certain data. You could be using any APM, or you have your own common logging frameworks or commons or whatever. Have the right data to measure. Once you're able to measure that, you start to really know what your customers are actually seeing on the ground, right? Have the psychological safety for people to say that, yeah, this is where we are today. Have that acceptance that, we can only improve from here, right? And data will tell you that. Now, you can go have a meaningful conversation with business, but business is going to say that, give me 3 nines, 4 nines, 5 nines.
Correct.
Are you equipped and are you built to deliver that, right? No. So I think that becomes very crucial as well. So how you actually manage a business, or how do you have that conversation with business? So you could actually start measuring and start having those meaningful conversations, and it's a journey, right? So you can look at it usually in a 4-stage approach. You can start defining it, you can start measuring it, and then you can start managing it. Typically three steps, right? Sure. When I can define an SLO, I can look at data, I can use the data for measurement, and then I can use that data to actually manage my systems. Right. Whether I want to, push more features, slow down features, and so on, right? But I think one crucial element that's actually missing in this 3-stage process is the transformation part. What the transformation actually means is this is where I am today, but I've got to improve. I may not have the right instrumentation. I may not have the right logging. I may not be able to have necessary filters to have a meaningful measurement and so on, right? So how do you actually transform? And that transformation is not restricted to only making data available, but also transforming your systems to achieve a certain desirable objective that your business has, right? And then obviously it's an iterative process. You may or may not necessarily get it right for the first time. Sure. So again, it's an iterative process. Can run it a few times. And then once you're in a situation where you can see that, my business is expecting 99 and I'm close to 99, then you can go into a consequence management phase. You can say that, now I can take a step back and, I can have some process changes done to support the consequences from a budget, right? Again, people shouldn't necessarily view it in a negative light that, if I'm not doing well, I'm going to get docked. You can also see it in a positive light, saying that, I'm doing 100 releases a month, and my customer experience is great. That means, you can give them a green lane. You can go faster with your features, right? So, it works both ways. So I think there are certain misconceptions around error budgets in terms of how people view it. I hope I've
absolutely.
And
so the last and final one was, what does it mean for an SRE who's coming on board? What kind of an advice would you say for someone who's aspiring to be an SRE, who have been started as a developer or a QA or an infrastructure specialist, and probably gets like a fairyland? He looks at SRE is going to be the new magic world. I want to get into that. If I was a curious little wonder kid coming to you and say that I'm going to do SRE as my profile, as my career, what would you advise for a person who's just stepping into that journey?
I would say read a lot of Sherlock Holmes, to be honest. Just kidding, right? I think, to be honest, the way I look at SREs are detectives.
Right.
You've got to sniff out problems before they happen, right? So you're constantly playing. You're not only a detective, but you're also a doctor, right? You've got to find and you've got to fix, right? So of course you can start from your area of comfort, right? Even in my previous experience, when I started, we started looking at only 2 key areas, right? We started looking at how to improve observability of systems, firstly. Second thing was, how do we actually bring in chaos testing as a practice, right? So that's where we started saying that, hey, if I can break my system in certain ways, I can get certain insights. Now, we can't boil the ocean on day one, right? So you've got to start somewhere, right? So observability obviously is a no-brainer, because the quicker you can measure how your customers are performing, or how your systems are performing, it really helps to drive a lot of insights. But what does it take for a system to have good observability, right? I think that's a key role that an SRE can actually start to play. Testing, again, is a very neglected, sorry to use the word neglected, maybe very overlooked area. I think SREs can really play a very strong, influential role there. So how can, you can look at that. Maybe you can start with chaos, but then don't restrict yourself to chaos, right?
Right.
Again, there's a huge learning curve. You discover everything new, and put on your learning hat forever, right?
Right.
Because you learn something every single day, right? So have that hunger to learn, have the detective lens, have the patience of a doctor to fix the problems, uh, and enjoy that ride. I think that's crucial, right? It's good
Excellent.
because it's not a happy situation to be amongst incidents every day, right? But have that fire, right? Say that got to do this right, got to fix this, and fix it to the bone, right?
Absolutely.
I think that will be very, very fulfilling.
Excellent. So I think you love the word where we talked about being a detective as well as a doctor. There's a fire, but you have to douse the fire and make sure it doesn't happen again. So the ability to make tomorrow better than today in whatever form we can do is going to be the real crux of an SRE. And thank you so much, Harpreet. We could talk for hours to do that, but this has been a fascinating session of real world experience of how SREs can go there, imbibe some of these practical aspects towards making their environments, their business, and ultimately their customers a delightful experience. Thank you so much for joining us. And viewers, I hope you enjoyed this episode number 11 of the SRE Practitioner Series. So stay tuned. If you like this one, comment us, and as well as make sure that you watch these episodes regularly, because you will have a lot of learnings from these packages. Thank you so much, Harpreet, for taking your time today.
Thank you, Suresh, for the opportunity, and thank you for all the viewers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.